Welcome back, and of course you're still watching News Night here on Arise News. Well, let's delve a little bit into politics. Well, with the conclusion of the 2023 general elections, attention now shifts towards who will become the principal officers of the 10th Assembly. Well, there have been reports of moves by many social and political interests to influence the choice of principal officers of the National Assembly. And while these efforts are ongoing, there is need to set up a legislative agenda for the National Assembly in the context of many social and economic crises currently bedeviling the country. Well, how should this crisis on the agenda for good governance shape the choice of leadership for the two legislative houses? And what role really should the leadership of the parties play in preparing the legislators, especially fresh legislators, for the challenge of legislating in today's Nigeria?
Dr. Sam Amadi, Arise analyst, is here to help us look into these and other issues. Welcome, Dr. Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Now, the interesting thing about leadership is that how it's formed is part of the evolution of leadership. All right. So, in forming the leadership of the 10th National Assembly, what are your expectations at this juncture? Because how it comes into office, how it comes into being, is a very germane part of its evolution. So what are your expectations?
Well, first, I think we can talk about how it should be and how it will likely be.
Absolutely.
Every political institution is a function of the dynamics. So we know that party interests will play a lot of role, but personal interests seems to respect more personal interests. I mean, what I mean is that ideally the parties will be the ones who will shape who becomes what. In many countries in the world, for example, the US or elsewhere, you already know who will be the house leader, probably you know who will be the majority leader, minority leader, and so on. So, but after each general election, the scramble and the fight begins. So it will be shaped by ego, gusto, bluster, who can dare and who will be able to have a more successful conspiracy. But of course, the party will play a key role. We've seen the APC Governors Forum weigh in, in a very strategic way, trying to put some order according to the structure. We're going to see also the dynamics around geopolitics. We're going to see some South-East, South-South, and all that struggling. But the best way, going by the way that the country looks, will be perhaps three things. One will be to reflect some degree of diversity in terms of membership of the principal officers, to reflect competences, because look, we have underemphasized the importance of legislative framework for growing the economy, managing conflicts, uniting the country, the three main agenda. Today, with the basic crises we have today are either around insecurity, economic stagnation. There has to be effort to grow the economy in a way that we can distribute more. We can take people out of poverty. We can create a sense of stakeholding for everybody. And so legislature is a critical driver of that, that work. Then the question is, what level of competencies? You see, we have too much routinized leadership at National Assembly, so people don't look at competencies. What kind of leader do we need? So if you ask me, ideally, we're going to be looking at diversity, using the National Assembly leadership to reform the Nigerian unity and diversity, get religious, ethnic balance, especially as we're going to have likely a president and vice who come from the same religious identity. So that balance is critical. Again, you want to see a mixture of gender. You see, we don't talk a lot about gender. If you look at the gender analysis, we are actually the worst in Africa. We are doing badly in terms of women in positions of leadership in parliament, in the executive branch. So I think that we should hear a little bit more around how do we gender leadership. It's not just for affirmative action. It's not just for tokenism. It has real implication for quality of leadership. As you see, several research by Gallup polls and many knowledge centers, it shows that organizations that women lead or women have equal stake with men shape out differently in terms of quality of leadership, in terms of transparency, accountability. So maybe we should also be taking around gendering leaderships in the National Assembly. The other issue is the youth adult mix. We've seen quite some young people who have been elected to the in the House of Reps. Should we have more youthful people? The argument is that, look, we had many youths. Animo was youthful when he became Senate President.
Absolutely.
Bankole was youthful. We've seen even Tambuwal was youthful. So the youth argument might not be too strong. But I think the gender argument, the diversity argument in terms of gender, ethnicity, and religion, and of course the competence argument. We want to see leadership shaped by who will preside, not just in terms of hitting the gravel, but who will preside in terms of nudging the legislature towards the kind of institutional work that we need to do. You see, you can't get a country that's underdeveloped or transition like Nigeria into development without robust legislative framework.
Absolutely.
And so who can provide that leadership to turn that house from mere rubber stamp or a bickering house to a house of strategic legislative work? And so these are some of the issues I think should shape. But unfortunately, what may shape it might be who has more clout, more financing, and the politics. That's
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Sam, I want to stay with something you talked about. You spoke about diversity. And the truth is, the 10th Assembly will be one of the most diverse that we've seen, especially if you look at the lower chamber. As it stands right now, the ruling APC, they've got about 177 seats, whereas the opposition, if you put the PDP and other 6 parties together, they're about 181. So, you know, that dynamics there is a different issue.
Very important.
Exactly. So let's talk about how this diversity really can be used.
Yeah.
You know, to really get Nigerians to that democratic state that we all desire. That's why we're seeing this diversity there.
If that happens, this will be the first parliament that has, the ruling party does not have control of both houses. So, and that would be very wonderful. Let me tell you why. If you look at established democracies, you know, the duality of two-party, when the two parties don't control the two houses, it lends for better rigor in governance. So imagine the present APC as it is as at now, the Senate APC and House of Reps, let's say PDP, helped by the minority. Now what that means first is that the presidency will be more painstaking and rigorous in proposing legislative interventions, knowing that it's not a case of caucus meeting. You don't have to bring them at the dinner at State House, say PDP, APC leadership, and you go slam through the legislature. More rigor. 2, legislative output will be much more rigorous and, pander to a larger geopolitics. So it's not a case of, for example, APC controls everything, the leadership gets things done. Even in the US example, whenever the House and the Senate are not held by the same party, it means bipartisanship. You reach out to people. And the idea of democracy, and that's why political scientists said that democracy is more stable when there's two parties, meaning that those two parties aggregate broad, different viewpoints. So for you to govern well, you need to reach out. So imagine if the House is led by PDP, supported by the other parties, and the Senate is led by APC. You must be tolerant enough. You must be able to care more about broad issues. So if there's a legislative agenda, you first get the PDP speaker. The PDP speaker is also listening to the PDP community, the caucus, the leadership, the constituents, those who voted for them. And so what you're going to see is a better mix of legislative agenda. And that's why I think that it's in national interest if the other parties can come together and take over the House of Reps, allow APC to take over Senate. You now see Nigeria cross that partisan divide more often to negotiate a legislative agenda, and then the executive will be much more, less hubristic. It's not a case of, it's our party, the Mr. President wants X. That helps to drive good governance. So I think that the first agenda here is, how can we bring these minority parties together to take over the House so they create a healthy balance? This is not about competition. It's about interdependency.
Are you optimistic they will be able to come together and speak in one voice?
I'm not too optimistic, but I think that's really a more patriotic thing, and that will help executive govern well, because they will be watching out here.
Because then it means we'll have a stronger check and balance system. But then you spoke about diversity, competence, and managing conflicts, and she made an allusion to that. In this case, where let's assume that the PDP is able to take over the House of Reps leadership, and then the Senate is being controlled by APC, then how do you see conflict management? Because I see a lot of brushes there,
Absolutely.
So how would they manage the conflicts?
It means that day one, everybody knows that nobody is overwhelmingly important. And so that tones down political rhetoric. And that makes people become more reasonable and responsible. So it helps when you have to negotiate your way. So you develop that skill, that attitude. We see some recklessness. You say, oh, we don't care. Now, if you know that you are going to, you see, once you know you have to balance, then the one is start being reasonable. And then the recklessness that provoke political crisis will be less. And you'll be surprised that you're going to have a more stable government with a bipartisan house where they have incentive to work together, because nobody can have it all. That will, first, it improves rigor. People know that, look, we can't carry nonsense and come to the house because we agreed in our meeting. People know that, look, for us to make sense, you have to also, PDP and others want some part of the country more. For example, Labour has more in the southeast, maybe PDP has more, maybe southeast, south. So when they come, APC maybe more in the north, for example, and southwest. When they come to the table, you are bringing diverse parts of the country together. And then people will now reach out, not just physically, but conceptually to the problems that other people have. And I think that's the beauty of, that's why you see places like Germany, US, UK, once one party doesn't control all, you see a more reasonable, middle of the road policy making. So and that's where you govern. You govern at the center.
They're better appeal to the sensibility of the people.
Well, Dr. Sam Amadi, just know, we all know that exciting times are with us, really, because we know there's going to be a lot of politics that play a role, but of course we need to look beyond the politics of what party, produces the leadership of the 10th Assembly, but of course representation of the people, quite critical. Dr. Sam Amadi, for your in-depth analysis tonight, we say thank you.
Thank you for coming.